Look at another review copy game, in this case Popular Front, again from Numbskull Games. They've been very nice to me. Although they didn't ask with this last set. This is again Patrick Stevens. Now, this is an interesting game. I'm not quite sure how to even categorize it. It's a warish game, what I call my wimp games or whatever. I'm not quite sure if it qualifies as a war game. It certainly is on the very light end of that, with a sort of CDG-ish flavor to it. But the reason I can't say for sure, I'm not sure how much simulation value there is to it. We'll see how it works out. So not only did I get the Popular Front from them, but I also got the Escalation, which is the expansion to it. Unfortunately, it looks to me like the cards from the expansion are slightly different color, significantly different, from the cards in the base game, which means you may want to print up your own packs or something and sleeve the cards if you're playing in an opposed environment, or you can just say screw it. It's probably not going to make that big a difference. Players can kind of hide their cards under their hand or something like that. Okay, let's take a look at how this game works. So this is basically a two-team game, and in the core game, you don't really have to. You can play with just a single deck per player, but with the expansion, I feel like the intention behind it is to make each of the different factions unique, so you really can't play it in anything other than the 6 players, or 2 players playing 3 players each, as it were. Something along that lines. Simply because the way the cards work, now there are special cards per player, I believe, and there are also special rules for the different factions, which kind of require you to have the full boat. On top of that, let me think. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be any individual victory in the game. We'll see, maybe I'm mistaken, but I've skimmed the rules. Well, I read them. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to set up by putting the pieces on the board. Each player has their own set of pieces, and that little black thing in there is going to be the political value of the game, of the current political status in the game. Each player has their own set of pieces that unfortunately, or not really too important, end up not particularly aligning with their card color. Their card colors are by the general army that they support, either nationalist or communist in general, or whatever you want to call them, Republicans. So you randomize. I'm going to go over the base game first, and then I'll go to the expansion. You randomize the setup in terms of who goes first, and then the first person who plays gets to drop one of his little pieces into a city. Great. Then you're going to mark the economic markers, and there's going to be one for each army, not for each faction. And they either start over on the circle, or if you want to play a longer game, which I think I'll do, over on the square flag further in. Now, from that, you count the number, the values of the cities that are controlled by different players. The cities being the circles. Some of them have no value. And whoever has the greater city value ends up getting a bonus equal to half of the difference. So their example here is if the Nationalists have 37 and the Republic have 30, the Nationalists will start with 3 spaces towards victory, towards the center of the track. You begin, let's see, somewhere, the political marker starts on one of the flagged positions in the center of the track on the side favoring the army with more city value. So he gets an additional bonus in that direction. I assume this cannot go to 0. And that it can't be evenly divided. I've got a power problem, so I'm going to have to swap batteries. Foolishly, didn't do that before I did the video, and now I'm going to have to process it over on U-Turd. Okay. So the goal of the game, well, I'm going to need to turn it off to get things out of the bag. The goal of the game is going to be to get your economic marker beyond the political marker, which will be trending, you know, perhaps in your direction or in the other person's direction, whichever one makes it easier or harder for you to surpass. Now, there's another goal, which is to hold all 6 of the cities that have a little star around them. And those should be pretty obvious because they're printed in a way that you can see them very nicely. Okay. Now you're going to have some interesting decision making here because you have the opportunity to move this around as well as the opportunity to gain victory points or economic points through your conquests, etc. So you have to make a decision on whether to invest into political or military solutions. The political solutions will be played here, and we'll see how these cards kind of interact for that. Okay. So your turn is going to go, first you determine what the turn order is. In the base game, it's completely random. You take all the different players, shuffle their pieces up, and spew them out on there. In the advanced expansion, you'll be seeing that the players have some control over their placement. And it's not random anymore. Then each player gets to draw 2 cards, perform however many actions they wish, and then they draw more cards to end their turn. The cards they get to end their turn are for doing good things in their turn. The cards can be played for mustering new units, which includes moving, political commitment into these boxes, as well as launching attacks. And then however many cities you capture in a turn gives you additional cards. Okay. So after all the players take their player turns, you resolve the political by comparing the points in here, and whichever army has the most points on it will get to move the political marker 1 space in their favor. And then you check to see if the game's over. First you see if there's the automatic victory conditions, and then you check to see the automatic of the 6 major cities, and then you check to see if you've surpassed the political marker. If both sides ended up surpassing the political marker in the same turn, by whoever did it by the most wins. If they're equally far apart, whoever has the political further in their direction wins, i.e. they actually had the easier job of it. Okay. So in the base game, all the decks of cards are exactly the same. And we can take a look at some of these here. And they have a value, a numerical value, and then they have this little reticule and combat instructions for it. And that's about it. You're allowed to stack up to 4 units in each of the city spaces of the same army. They can be different factions. And every city space must have an army in it at all times. Okay, so the first of the actions that's available is a muster. When you play a card, you get a number of musters equal to the number on the card. Like I said, sort of like a CDG, except for these are not events, these are combat capabilities that'll be used. So each point of your muster allows you to either recruit a unit or move a bunch of units from one city to an adjacent city. If you move, you can just move a stack of your own units from one city to an adjacent friendly city along one of these roads, and you can't leave a city empty. But you could leave one of your allied forces in there if you're playing a multiplayer game of it. Recruiting. You can recruit in a city controlled by your army. You don't have to actually have troops there. Just one of your allies would. And but there's a restriction to that. You have to be connected to more friendly cities than enemy cities from that city. And connections here are road and sea lanes. There's an exception to that. The fifth column card allows you to recruit in any city that you control, you or your allies control. You don't have to have that kind of dominance over the area. You can play a card to the political section, and it's just placed face down. Or you can start a combat. To start a combat, you have to be adjacent to an enemy city. You have to have at least 2 units of your army there and 1 of your units there in that city, or more. The reason you need 2 units of your army there is you can't abandon the city, and you're going to have to advance if you win the battle. When you start a battle, you're going to play a card face down to initiate the battle, and that's going into your reserve. Okay. So your power for the battle will be based on your army, the number of units involved in the battle. The defender gets 1 point for each unit of his army in the space being attacked, plus 1 point if the road being crossed has a river, or the road being traveled on has a river crossing it. The attacker, only his own units count towards the attack. Any allied units don't count towards the attack. All of the players' units count for the attack. You don't have to worry about leaving a unit behind at this point, but you do have to. There do have to be 2 of that army's units in there to launch the attack. The attacker decides which defender is going to play cards in the combat out of all the defending powers that are present in that space. Both players will take turns playing cards face down. So the attacker plays a card face down to his reserve and says, I'm committing this. The defender, who's been selected by the attacker, has the option to then play one of his cards. If he doesn't take that, it's over. We're going to go to the battle then. But if he does, then the attacker gets to place another card, then the defender gets to place another card. Now, if the defender plays no cards, the attacker gets a bonus card back from his deck into his hand. If a defender ever runs out of cards, or if a non-active player runs out of cards, he gets to draw a new card into his hand immediately. So you're not going to drain the defender completely, so you have to consider carefully how many cards you want to commit as the attacker if he's matching you. Okay. Then you hit a deploy phase where each player takes a card from their reserve and deploys it to the battle. And that's going to generate the combat effect. This is not a combat effect. This is just an effect for the card. It's particularly effective in the political status. So in this case, I would eliminate 1 deployed enemy card of the opponent's choice. That's pretty potent, but I could only use it after the cards have already been revealed. Some of these affect the reserve. They can only be used against cards that haven't yet been deployed. So each player reveals 1 card from their reserve at a time, starting with the defender, which means he gets the first action, military action there, or effect. And once both players' reserves are empty, the deploy phase is over. And then you calculate the combat total, which is going to be the unit values that you added up, plus the value of all the cards that have been deployed successfully. And the defender, of course, gets his water bonus. Whoever has the higher value wins the battle. The defender will win any ties. Okay, if the attacker wins, and some of this changes, but all the defending units are destroyed. The attacker must immediately move 1 unit or more to occupy the conquered city. He can't vacate the city that he attacked from. He has to leave a unit back. The attacking army's economic marker is moved a distance equal to the city's value. If the defender played no cards to defend, the attacker immediately draws a card. That maybe happened before. I don't think... So what's weird here is it's not clear. Here it's mentioned under attacker victory. Here it's mentioned earlier under just card play. So I'm not sure if the attacker has to win for that to take effect. It's hard to tell what the intention was. Maybe it's covered in the example of play, but I don't read that stuff. And it probably doesn't cover both cases. Okay. If the defender wins, then if the attacker was the only player occupying the city from which the attack was launched from, all but one of his units is destroyed. If his allies are in that city, then all the attacker's units are destroyed because he committed everything to the attack. It's just he can't abandon the city for that. And the defender won't be affected. If a city is completely isolated with no adjacent cities that are friendly, he's not allowed to use any of these deploy effects on offense or defense. The cards can still be played for their value, but they don't have the military effect. The partisans are the exception to this, and their deploy effect is not affected by supply. I already talked about victory conditions for the game. I'll reiterate, passing this or getting all 6 of the key cities. And like I said, there does not seem to be any differentiation between the players on a side. So what about the expansion? Well, what the expansion does is it shakes things up. On the first turn, whoever has the least number of cities will be the first player. The second least is second, etc., up to the person with the most cities. If people are tied, it's randomized. The total value of cities adds up to 67. At the end of each round, the next turn's player order is determined by however many points each player played into the political side. Whoever played the most will be going first. I'm assuming going first is an advantage here, but I'm not positive. Ties being randomized again. There's a track on the back of the page to keep track of how much political commitment each player had. You know, that should be pretty obvious from the cards. I don't think that's going to cause a problem. Okay, sea lanes are handled a little different. They're not just roads anymore. Completely isolated island cities. Hold on. Let's see. Okay, first of all, they don't count as adjacent for recruitment or supply. Completely isolated island cities, right? Things that can't be reached by land, can be recruited at, but it costs you 2 points for each unit that you recruit there, and they'll always be considered in supply for combat. When making an attack across a sea lane, combat's going to work a little differently. Immediately before the deployment, at the end of the reserve phase, both players reveal all Navy and aircraft cards from their reserves. A player fighting in a city out of supply cannot reveal any. If the defender reveals more cards than the attacker, all cards are discarded, the attack failed, and the political marker moves 1 towards the defender in celebration of the naval victory. Note that the units aren't destroyed. It's just the attack didn't even happen because of the naval battle. Okay, if a defender chooses to play no cards in a combat, they automatically lose the battle and may immediately move any units from the battle city to adjacent friendly cities. The attacker draws a bonus card as normal, but will not get a card for capturing the city at the end of the turn. Now this is a major change. Any units that can't retreat are eliminated, And you can retreat with no available retreat paths, i.e. you can not play a card with no available retreat paths, in which case all your units are surrendering. If a group of units belonging to different factions is attacked, the player chosen to play cards makes the decision whether or not to retreat and can choose the retreat paths. Instead of a card being called deploy effects, the military reticule now defines them as military cards. I've already kind of worked that into things. These effects will be ignored if out of supply, just like the deploys were. This doesn't change any of the old cards' effects. It just makes a couple of new cards clearer in effect because they have effects that happen prior to the deployment. We'll see them as they come up. Okay, each of the powers, each of the players has their own special abilities. So the Phalange has industry. After drawing a card for winning a political phase, the Phalange player... Ooh, I forgot to mention that, didn't I? Yeah, whoever wins the political phase... yeah, each member of the winning army draws a card in the political phase because their foreign aid came in better. Okay, so the Phalanges, after drawing a card for winning the political phase, they can shuffle any number of production cards from their discard pile to their deck. Requetes. Highly trained and motivated. Each turn after the turn order has been established, the Requetes player may discard a card to move their marker to the very beginning of the turn order, pushing everyone else back. If this is their last card, though, they don't get an immediate draw. I don't know what that means. Like, if they're attacked or something, I think they're without a card for that. Again, as usual, Numbskull aren't terribly good at nailing down everything. This has been pretty decent, though, so far. I'm not thrilled with the style of the rules, but that's just a matter of taste. They actually seem complete until we get to the expansion. Okay, the Carlists, Indoctrination. Once per turn after winning an attack, they may add one of the cards they played to the combat to their political stack instead of just discarding it. That's a potent ability. They get to score the card twice, basically. The Communists, the nobility of the common man. Each turn after drawing cards for the end of the turn, the Communist player can choose to discard the top card from their deck to search their draw or discard pile for a partisan. If their draw pile is searched, it is shuffled. Gotcha. Okay, so I'm not sure what discarding the top card from your deck really does. It kind of randomizes your deck more. You might lose things you want, but it'll give you a chance to get a partisan card, which I guess you get to keep in your hand. Sounds like something they want to do all the time, but it has some weird effects. Anarchists, divided focus. Once per turn, if the anarchists have a pair of cards with the same name, they can discard it and draw 3 cards from their deck. That's awesome. I don't know how many pairs there are, but socialists, coordination. After political resolves as a republic victory, but before the Requetes player activates, the socialists can choose their position in the turn order. Again, kind of a nifty thing, but they have to win the political establishment for that. All right, well, obviously things aren't set up, but that's because setup is part of the play. So I'm going to load this up, and then we'll start playing.